Hi, and thanks for checking out Next Level Carpentry. I'm going to start out this video with a few assumptions. The first assumption is that you've never heard of a Squaliper before. And that's a pretty safe assumption because I made up the word. So there's little chance that you ever heard of that before. The second assumption is that you're curious whether you need a Squaliper or not. And I can't answer that question, but I like having one around just because I can. And the third and final assumption is that you're curious if you want to make a Squaliper. Well, that one you'll have to figure out for yourself. But it's a fun and easy build, so let's get started. A simple build like this is a great way to show off some of that really cool looking wood you have around the shop. You know the stuff I'm talking about. It's a beautiful piece, but there's not enough of it to build anything else with. Well, this is a perfect project for that. And mine is starting out with this funny looking piece, which is actually part of an apple tree. I've had this thing for way too long. It's time to use it for something fun. And then this is a piece of fiddleback maple or quilted maple. And this is from a tree that grew in the front yard of a friend of mine once upon a time. So those pieces are going to become another Squaliper for the shop. And of course, it's not necessary to laminate pieces for the Squaliper blade, but I'm going to do it just because I can. And the upshot of it is you want to end up with a piece of wood about 18 inches long, about 5/8 of an inch thick, and about 3.5 inches wide. And if you've got that in one piece, you're 3 steps ahead of me. This apple wood is really unique. You can see it doesn't look like much on two sides, but the sides where I've planed it, it's got a beautiful pale pinkish orange color that'll contrast nicely with that fiddleback maple. I've got to do some cutting and ripping and planing of these pieces so they're ready to be glued up into a blank that's big enough for this Squaliper blade. First, I'll use the joiner to square up one corner of this apple wood block and flatten one face of the quilted maple. Next, I rip the other edge and the other face of the apple wood billet to square it up all the way around. Next, I'll resaw the billet roughly in half for a couple pieces that are a little stronger than 3/4 of an inch. And those will make a beautifully book-matched pair for the Squaliper. After reflattening the faces of the resawn board, I'll resaw them once again so that all 3 of my pieces are roughly the same thickness before taking them to the thickness planer. And this sequence of steps allows me to compensate for any internal stress in this billet of wood, because if it springs or cups during the first resaw, I've got enough thickness to reflatten them to end up with the true pieces I need for glue up. Next, I run all 3 pieces through the thickness planer to get them to the same initial thickness. And I'm leaving them a little proud of the final thickness so that I can true them up once again after the glue up. With this initial thickness planing done, I go back to the joiner to square up edges and then use a table saw to make sure the edges of the blanks are parallel. I want my quilted maple accent strip to be 1/4 inch wide, so I'll use a special push stick to slice off 1/4 inch of the highly figured edge of this quilted maple blank. And I can make this cut clean enough for glue up because I've got a stiff, sharp blade supported by a forest blade stiffener. So I'm not getting any chatter in this cut. And I want to do that at this point because I don't want to run this thin strip over the joiner or through the thickness planer. And with that little bit of prep work, these pieces are all trued up and ready for glue up. And glue up is a piece of cake because I've milled all the fight out of this wood with a systematic stock preparation process that removes all the undesirable aspects of any piece of wood so that they're clean, flat, and true at this stage of the game. And as always, a handful of powdery sawdust and a sharp putty knife make quick work of cleaning up glue squeeze out because it's so much easier now than waiting till everything dries. And I throw in a time stamp to keep an eye on how long the glue has had to cure so that I don't unclamp this prematurely. The Pareto principle tells me that I'll spend 80% of my time doing 20% of my work. And I know that setup is about 80% of my time. So to take advantage of that, I decided to mill up another blank out of a solid piece of stock so that I'll end up with 2 Squalipers when I'm done and only spend 20% more time to get it. And this scrap of figured maple left over from a recent project is the perfect specimen to multiply my efforts. Once the glue's had a chance to dry, I can remove the clamps and then send these pieces through the thickness planer for a few light passes to take the blanks down to exactly 1/2 inch in thickness. Because I cleaned the glue off while it was wet, I don't have to scrape hardened glue off these pieces at this stage. And a few light passes, alternating faces on the blanks, gets me down to 1/2 inch in short order, and the pieces are perfectly true and flat. And since the pieces are still over width, I'll re-square one edge and re-true the opposite edge on the joiner, then the table saw, before dialing in the final width for these pieces. And I want the blade for my Squalipers to be exactly 3.5 inches wide when it's complete. So I'll lay that out and rip the pieces ever so slightly wide so that I can take one more pass on the joiner to get a plane surface for the finished width dimension. And that's exactly what I'm after. The next step is to square up one end on these blanks. But before I do that, I want to stop for a second and ask that you consider subscribing to Next Level Carpentry if you haven't already. It's free, you know, and you'll be notified every time a new video is uploaded to the channel here. And you'll be able to see it fresh off the press. If you're interested in any of the tools or supplies you see used in the video, there's a link in the video description down below as well, and that is to an Amazon influencers page where all the products and tools you see there are the same low online price you expect, but Amazon pays ad fees to Next Level Carpentry, and so I really appreciate it. Check that out. Teespring t-shirts like this are available in the Teespring link in the video below, so check that out if that's anything you're interested in. While you're at it, poke the thumbs up button and ring a little bell over there at YouTube to let them know things are happening here at Next Level Carpentry. Now I'll take these pieces over to the miter saw and square up an end. Keep in mind that your Squaliper is only going to be as accurate as this particular cut, so make sure everything's dialed in and this cut is perfectly square in both directions. That square cut is important to accuracy, and the next cut is important to function. The framing square that I'm using, and most framing squares, are exactly 1/8 of an inch thick. So I need to make an 1/8 of an inch thick kerf in the end of this board so it slides over the blade of the framing square. A great way to make the 1/8 inch slot in the end of these Squaliper blades is to use a full kerf rip blade to make the cut. A full kerf is 1/8 of an inch wide, and this Freud blade I'm using has a flat top grind, so the slot I cut will have a perfectly flat bottom. I use a marking knife and a caliper to lay out the kerf in the end of one of my Squaliper blades, and an 1/8 inch slot centered up in a 1/2 inch piece leaves exactly 3/16 on either side of the kerf. Rubbing a little graphite in there and then erasing it off makes my tiny marks easier to see. I run the saw blade up to make sure it's running 90 degrees to the table surface, and then dial in the rip fence to line up with my layout marks. And then I double check the setting with the caliper to make sure I'm happy with everything before committing to making the cut. The last part of this setup is to raise up the blade so it's cutting 1 7/8 inch deep at top dead center of the blade. With everything dialed in and locked down, I used an auxiliary fence made out of a piece of plywood on my miter gauge to help push the piece past the blade for this bold money cut. And there it is. One small cut for Matt, one large cut for Matt Kind. And that quick, simple, straightforward cut makes this piece fit perfectly over the tang on the framing square. And with meticulous stock prep and accurate cutting setups, this Squaliper lines up perfectly at 90 degrees to one tang and parallel to the other on this framing square. And for the pure satisfaction of an instant replay, I'm going to go ahead and cut the kerf on this other tang while I'm at it. Naturally, with the blade up so high, I've got to be very mindful of the fact that the blade will cut anything in front of the fence as well as behind the fence. If you're doing a lot of this, it's not a bad idea to put a protective shroud on the back side of a gauge like this so you don't inadvertently leave something precious back there and have it get cut off. But it's great to be at this stage of the process, and I don't know if you can see that in the video or not, but there's blue smoke coming up that was generated by that full kerf blade making a bold and aggressive cut in this hard maple. So you can't say I don't use smoke and mirrors here at Next Level Carpentry. There's the smoke anyways. With the dicey dado slot accurately cut, I can mark the Squaliper blade to length with a short tang on the framing square, and then cut these to length on the miter saw. And that's a cute little scrap. I should find something to use that for. The Squaliper blade fits fine, but I want to add a D-shaped hole for clamping and then embellish the blade with a couple of curved notches to jazz it up a little bit. I'll space the D-shaped clamping hole 3/4 of an inch back from the edge of the framing square blade, and then lay out for 1 1/4 Forstner bit to do the round part of the hole, which means I'll lay out the center of the hole 3/4 inch back from this straight line. I'll take advantage of the Pareto principle again here and clamp these two blocks together so that I only have to drill the hole once after getting it laid out and set up. That Forstner bit makes some pretty interesting looking shavings from drilling these holes, doesn't it? Embellish the ends of the Squaliper blades with a little visibility divot. I drill a hole with a Forstner bit 1/4 inch in from the edge of this piece of scrap and then clamp everything down. This setup leaves 3/8 of an inch of the Forstner bit exposed beyond the edge of this fence. And that unusual arrangement allows me to clamp my Squaliper blades in place and then drill that partial circle right in the end of the piece. And I call that embellishment made easy. To finish up the D-shaped holes, I'll just square lines across and lay out the sides of the D, and then go to the drill press to drill holes that mark the corners of the D. And I think a 5/16 inch brad point bit is perfect for rounding off these square corners. Or is it squaring off the round corners? I don't know. If I were making more than 2 of these D-shaped holes, I'd probably make a router template to speed up the process, and I probably should do it for these 2, but I'm just going to go old school and manual using a drill bit, a jigsaw, and a file to make these look the way I want them. And this is a perfect example of the lazy man works the hardest, because I don't feel like making those templates. I'll probably work harder in getting these done, but oh well. There's always more than one way to get something done. Kind of looks like a little Mickey Mouse with those round ears sticking up. No more Mickey. I'll get them that close for now and dial them in a little bit more later. But first I want to embellish this corner with a little rounded notch also. And in a style channeling Bob Ross, let's go about a 1/2 inch off this accent line and about 1.5 inches in, and then what the heck, use the diameter of an Old Masters 1-quart paint can to lay out the curve. And that's how I'm going to lay out my curve, but you can lay out your curve any way you want. It's your Squaliper and it's your curve. Again, a template would be quicker, but I'm just going to jigsaw this, and then I'll show you a little cheat for smoothing up embellishments like this with less manual labor. And no, you don't have to remind me. I'm fully aware that I've got a $2,500 bandsaw 10 steps away, but I'm still doing this with an $80 jigsaw. Go figure. And the trick I mentioned for smoothing up little embellishing curves and stuff like this with less work when you're too lazy to make a template like I am today is, rather than get this whole curve smooth and faired up and then go to the routing process, just switch that around. Route it first to the rough curve, and because the bearing follows only the very middle, you only have to smooth up a little 1/8 inch wide strip or so to get a perfect curve, which is a lot faster and easier for someone like me who's too lazy to make a template and who doesn't particularly care for sanding. I'm using an 1/8 inch roundover bit with a 1/2 inch pilot bearing on it to ease the edges on all these curves. That just makes the tool nicer to handle, gives it a nicer fit and finish. Plus it really simplifies the process for fairing and smoothing up these little embellishing curves. Route first, fair later. And the same principle applies to the D-shaped hole. And this sequence just makes this a lot simpler and a lot quicker and a lot better. We'll start with a 1/2 round file to shape that little curve so it fits the diameter of the paint can before I chase it with some 80 grit sandpaper in one of my PVC sanding tubes and then reroute it to finish up the embellishment. And that'll do nicely, but it mainly serves as a reminder as to why I generally use templates for even simple things like this. The 1/2 inch bearing on the roundover bit doesn't allow the radius to follow the tight corners on this D. So I clamp the piece down to the bench and use a chainsaw file to tighten up the radius in those corners. It's a small detail, but when it takes such little effort to add those extra touches, I like to do it because I really think it's worth it for making the finished product just a little more special. Right, Mr. Russ? FYI, I decided I didn't like the shape of the little curve on the end of the Squaliper blade, so I changed the layout to go 3/8 down off the accent stripe and then 3 inches in from the end. And then in a flash of inspiration, I used the curve on my little garbage can for the new profile. And then I used the same jigsaw, route, fair, and reroute process to modify the curve on both of my blades. And by using that same route, smooth, and reroute process, it doesn't take me long to reshape the 2 curves on the end of these pieces. And I like the look a whole lot better, but the trouble is, if somebody says, geez dude, that looks like garbage, I'll have to agree with them. Now that I've got the embellishments shaped and routed like I want them, I'll trace around the other edges with that same 1/8 inch roundover bit. And I'll do all the edges except the very top edges because I want those to remain relatively square, which I'll achieve by just giving them a wipe with a piece of fine sandpaper. I'll use this Gator hand sanding block that I like so much and 120 grit paper to makes quick work of easing those very sharp edges. And once the edge treatment is taken care of, I'll use my Oops eraser to remove layout marks and then give this a final sand with 120 grit paper, followed by 220, and then a quick wipe with some 320 before applying gel varnish for the finished coat. The smooth finish I get from my DeWalt thickness planer at the slow feed rate means that this sanding process is pretty quick and easy. 120 grit removes the planer marks quickly, 220 grit removes the 120 grit sanding scratches, and 320 removes the 220 grit scratches and leaves a perfect finish that's ready to accept the Old Masters gel poly finish that I'll put on this. After a tedious time of sanding all the faces, edges, nooks, and crannies on these pieces, they are just unbelievably smooth and ready for a coat of this Old Masters gel polyurethane that I use on projects like this. The reason I like gel poly is because it soaks into the wood. It's not like applying a coating to the surface like spraying them with lacquer. Plus it's plenty durable because it's a polyurethane. I don't want to mess up my t-shirt, so I can wear an apron, which is something I rarely do, because they're just frustrating. But it's necessary. So, got that done, and using some Venom Steel nitrile gloves to keep my manicure up, which is essential at this stage of the game. And I have a rare roll of paper towels here. There's one sheet left. So that's going to have to do it for this job. I'll do the maple first, just because I can. And that poly really makes that grain pop, doesn't it? God, it's a beautiful piece of wood. And I basically got it out of the scrap bin. And now let's see what this apple and maple look like. Ooh! That's an amazing color. And that's the natural state of the wood. No stain, no dye. Nothing but that beautiful grain. That quilted maple just really sets it off. I love that combination. Unfortunately, that's the one and only piece of that wood I have, so. Yeah, hey Chip, how's it going out here? Looks like you got a project going there. What? Oh, yeah. Hey, how's it going, Matt? Yeah, I just made those Squalipers that we were talking about the other day. You came just in time. I'm putting the finish on them. What do you think of that? Remember that old scrap of applewood you had up there on the shelf? Now we got an applewood Squaliper. Oh yeah, I remember that. Huh, those are pretty cool. Been keeping everybody busy watching you make those, huh? I'm just going to finish wiping this on here. Give it a nice thick coat. That way these guys will last a long time and look cool, even if they don't get used a lot. That's excellent. I've been in the office doing paperwork and editing video, so it's great that you got to see a tutorial on how to make Squalipers by Chip. The guy can get it done when he puts his mind to it. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, seeing those Squalipers, whether you ever make one or if you make one, whether you ever use it. They're fun to have around, and it's a great way to show off a neat piece of wood. Plus, you get to see some techniques, methods, and sequences that you can use on other woodworking projects. So I hope that's helpful. And of course, we don't want to wrap up the video without giving a big shout out to all the patrons on Patreon. Everybody on this list has gone above and beyond to help support the channel, and it makes videos and projects like this doable, because I'm able to devote time producing these videos that I might otherwise spend out on a project working for clients. And having Chip around is just an added bonus, because I can get 3 things done at once instead of only 2. So that's pretty remarkable. And again, thanks everybody for going above and beyond for Next Level Carpentry. For other viewers, If you're motivated or considering becoming a patron, you can join this growing list just by going to Patreon. There's a link in the video description below. And I try to include everybody's name in the scrolling list at the end of the video as a small measure of appreciation. I'm building a small but growing library of behind-the-scenes video clips and shorts from the job site and from the shop, and uploading those to an exclusive playlist for all the patrons who sign up on the list. And that's all part of the bigger plan to get more videos more often for all viewers. And we really appreciate it. Now the chip's got that varnish applied. I'm going to let it dry for a few hours, and then I'll do a short demonstration of how the Squaliper works and a close-up of that wonderful finish on those pieces. So stay tuned for that. But for everybody that's leaving here, until next time, thanks for watching. Well, it was sure cool of Chip to come by and make himself at home in the shop and show you guys how to make a Squaliper. Well, he calls it a Squaliper. I call it a Squaliper. But this is what they look like when they're all done. And a piece of hardwood with a smooth finish and gel poly is just something to behold. It's a gorgeous finish and has a wonderful feel to it. And to see what these work like when it's all done, just a matter of sliding it on a framing square, and then with the finger in that little clamping hole, slide it up and down, take a measurement of anything, and you can also use a squeeze clamp. That's what that D-shaped hole is for, so that you can measure something and then maintain the measurement with the clamp. And of course, the measurements are read on the scale here on the framing square. It's just as simple as that. This is the original one I made. This is made out of some curly koa wood from Hawaii. I made this back in 2006, and it worked well. Never failed me. But I like the design that I made with this little wider sweep in it on this one. That one will get donated to a friend, I think. I wanted to do a segment to show you how to clean up your framing square if you want it to look as good as your new Squaliper. And I shot this little video segment to show that. If you want to get your framing square to look as good as your Squaliper blade, what I use is a Sandflex block. This is some kind of rubber with grit impregnated in there. It comes in medium, fine, and coarse. And a coarse Sandflex block is perfect for restoring the brushed finish on this aluminum framing square. And it works equally well on steel. I think you get the idea. And once your framing square is all cleaned up and slicked up, you've got a first-class Squaliper on your hands, like this one, which is actually suitable for a YouTube thumbnail. Imagine that. Cut. And I think the most important thing for me now is to make sure that Chip doesn't get a big head and start shooting all his own videos. I might have created a monster.